Peter, one rule that happened this week, a rule that was passed, it's not going to change the way we see the game. It's going to change the way the officials see the game, specifically the replay assistant, expanded duties. You had reported in Football Morning in America on Monday that it was going to be close. The vote ended up being successful. The replay assistant will have greater duties. I call it a half measure. I want booth umpire. I want sky judge. I'm on record with that. Your thoughts on this mid-level step to give the replay assistant more say, or at least more potential influence over what the officials decide on the field?
Mike, the reason why it's staggered across the finish line is because there's too many teams in the NFL that don't truly know what it means and still don't really know what it means, because they feel like, and I talked to one person last weekend, an NFL coach, who said to me that, you know, there are a lot of coaches in the league that feel like New York just wants to stick its finger in the pie and have more influence on what call is made on the field. And as much as people are celebrating the fact that NFL games were about a minute and a half shorter in 2020 versus 2019, I think most people in the league feel like now that that's just going to be reversed. That even if the flags stay at a much lower level, I think 3 accepted penalties fewer per game in 20 versus 19, even if the number of penalties stay the same, there could well be more stoppages and more crew conferences, because the replay assistant upstairs can call down to the field and say, hey, wait a minute. It looked like he had a foot out of bounds. You guys should have a conference about that and let me talk to you. And so I think that's why this came close to not passing, because there were people in the league who feel that it's just going to lead to more overreach by New York and by the replay assistant.
But if ultimately the goal is to get it right, that's what surprises me the most about this. It surprises me that they won't go the full distance and have a member of the officiating crew who sees what we see at home and bridges the gap between what millions witness on TV and what 7 people see amid the gladiators. I don't know why there's a resistance to get these calls right and to avoid another Rams-Saints debacle. That's what they should be striving for, Peter. I don't understand why there isn't an obsession with avoiding another outcome like that, because this thing, whatever it is, however it works, it's not going to prevent, as implemented, it's not going to prevent what we saw in the Rams-Saints NFC Championship game.
Here's what one person close to the competition committee told me about that purview and about why the competition committee doesn't want what so many coaches want, which is the 8th official. And that is this: if you think that an 8th official upstairs isn't going to lead to more flags, then you're probably being naive. The NFL doesn't want more flags. And the reason why the competition committee liked this sort of compromise, this halfway measure, is that if there is an obvious wrong call, like, did he trap the ball? Did he not? Did he step out of bounds? Did he not? They're going to be able to correct that. Now, it remains to be seen whether the replay assistant upstairs is going to be able to have the power in a case like in the Rams-Saints game, is going to be able to have the power to buzz down quickly and say, you got to have a conference, and that was obvious pass interference. That's not why this rule was created, but I don't know at this point, Mike, whether the replay assistant is going to have that sort of power in the game.
My understanding is the replay assistant won't, Peter. These are specific objective situations. Did 2 feet get down? Was the ball trapped, as you said? Objective, right. Undeniable, that can be quickly supported by video evidence. So if there is a clear and obvious error on a subjective call like pass interference, replay assistant can't do anything. New York can't do anything. Now, look, I'm a firm believer in knowing when to break the rules in advance of the greater good, and the greater good is avoid another major controversy. And if Al Riveron had simply broken glass in event of the emergency that happened in the Superdome, imagine how less we would have had to talk about over the last 2 years. So I guess I shouldn't complain. But my interest is the game. I don't want. Now, it would be good for us to cover from a business standpoint, an interest standpoint, an engagement standpoint. It would be good for us to cover a major political controversy where, because gambling is legalized in 35 or 40 states, and it'll get there within the next few years to 35 or 40, it's in the mid-20s now, if Congress decides to create an agency with oversight over the NFL, if some prosecutor decides to convene a grand jury to see whether or not someone was on the take that influenced that horrible call that wasn't rectified, you don't want that if you're the NFL, Peter. You want to try to avoid that, and that's what amazes me. They have that failure of imagination. We've heard that word a lot this year in other contexts, but in this context, you need to have the ability to see where you are and where you can be if you don't create a proper pathway to avoid that destination. And that's what I think they're going to flirt with as gambling becomes more prevalent, as the stakes literally and figuratively get higher and higher for these calls. You got to put mechanisms in place to avoid another instance of what we're seeing on the screen with one of the most controversial calls in league history.
Yeah, and Mike, I understand how the rule is written. You know, I really do. But I also think that, you know how that play would have changed right there? I'll tell you how that play would have changed. That play would have changed with a crew conference, okay, on the field right after that call, with other officials being able to come into the conference and say, you know, Nickel Roby-Coleman, interfered with this receiver. And if they get confirmation from upstairs, Mike, I know what the rule says. I really do. I know what the rule says. But if in a crew conference they decide to throw the flag, maybe there's going to be some grand investigation of saying that the germination of this came from the replay assistant upstairs. He's not supposed to do that. But in that case, if I'm Roger Goodell, I come out on Sunday night, in the officiating department, and I say, we got the call right. That's exactly what I would say. So I understand the letter of the law in the rule, but honestly, I just can't buy that it's not going to fix an absolutely egregious call when everybody in the world can see it.
Well, they already had the mechanism in place to do it. Now Riveron chose not to do it in that moment. The question is, with the replay assistant having a voice in the process, will that make a difference? Could it be between the replay assistant and Al Riveron saying, drop the flag, drop the flag, drop the flag gets dropped? But my understanding is Riveron specifically did not say anything because the rules prevent him from doing so. So, Peter, we're in the same place here. We agree on this. I think the bottom line is, if there's any chance that there will be some sort of effort by the replay assistant to get that flag dropped if there's another Nicole Roby-Coleman, Tommy Lee Lewis incident like that technically is beyond the purview of the replay assistant. If we think they're going to do it and we think they should, my point is this: let's just create the rule in the first place. So we know it'll happen. So we don't just have to hope that someone will have the willingness to break the rules to avoid a bigger problem. That's all I'm saying. Let's make the rule fit what we hope the application will be.
I understand that, Mike, but there's 273 now regular season games, or 272, whatever it is, 17 per team. And if you think that's only going to happen once a year, there's going to be all kinds of people are going to want the officiating to be so perfect that they're going to say, well, geez, why didn't the replay official get involved in this, or the replay assistant get involved in this call or that call or the other call? I just think, look, it's hard to say when there is an emergency break glass, okay? but a pass interference call in the third quarter of a game between, Detroit and Buffalo is probably not that moment. And I realize I am one of those people who say a foul is a foul is a foul. I don't care when it happens. I don't care what game. I don't care anything. If it's a foul, it's a foul. Call it. But if you open up the can of worms on, say, pass interference, you're never, ever going to play a 3-hour football game again, ever. Well, the games are going to be 3 hours and 20 minutes long. I realize many people don't care. I don't really care either, because there are windows that are bigger now. But I just, if you think that it's not going to really slow down the game, I think you're wrong.
I think there's a point where the NFL has to prioritize getting it right over how long it takes, because of the proliferation of gambling and the money they're going to make from it as that industry matures. Just last week, $1 billion over 5 years in money for nothing from a tri-exclusive, I still don't know what that means, I think I do, sportsbook partnership with FanDuel, DraftKings, and Caesars. They're going to make more and more money. I had an owner tell me late last year, franchises are going to be worth between $8 and $10 billion soon, as they understand how to monetize and generate more and more and more from gambling. So if you're going to do that, Peter, it's incumbent, I think, on the league to spend the money, and I think at the core that's what they don't want to do, is spend the money on 17 new employees when they already have the replay assistants there who can do this half job. Why pay for the full job and add all these expenses? Well, here's why you add the expenses, because you avoid the inevitable headache of what happens when, even if it's third quarter of a Week 11 meaningless game between two teams that have 3 wins combined, if people are betting in-game, play-by-play, and that's where it's heading, and that bet is corrupted by an official who has his head up his butt and they don't fix it, that's going to be a problem. So there's not going to be an objective or a hope or a wish or an aspiration that they get these calls right. At some point, there's going to be a mandate that they get these calls right. That's where the ball's moving. And I'm astounded that they don't see that, Peter.
Mike, how many calls that are overturned on replay out of 10? How many replay decisions, whether they're overturned or confirmed, or upheld? How many of those do you disagree with? Probably 3 out of 10, right? That you on the field. I would say, if I'm just guessing, I disagree with like 3 of them. Remember when we had that NBC session a couple of years ago with Al River on, and he would show us the plays on the thing, and he would say, okay, what do you think of this one? What do you think of that one? And even on ones that Al Riveron thought were obvious, I remember saying at one point, I said, no, I disagree. That was pass interference. And he said, no, it wasn't. And so, that is the problem with officiating. We don't all see it the same. And that's why if you create a situation where you can open that up to an eye in the sky, I would guess, and it's just a guess, that eye in the sky, 2 out of 10 times is going to get it wrong. So should you really have the eye in the sky on pass interference? And that's kind of my problem with with a guy who can throw a flag from upstairs. I don't think he's going to get it right all the time, number one. And number two, it's just going to make the game longer.
I almost called this a good problem to have. It's not a good problem to have. On one hand, it's a good problem because the NFL is going to make a ton of more money from gambling, but it becomes a potentially bad problem to have because you have to make sure that your backyard is clean, that everything is taken care of, because if you have a mess out there and you don't take care of it, someone else is going to take care of it for you, whether it is the creation of a federal agency, whether it is some sort of full-blown scandal and people are potentially indicted for some sort of Tim Donaghy-type skullduggery. I just think that every measure, whatever the cost, needs to be explored and considered, and some need to be adopted. So we understand, yes, there are some close calls, and reasonable minds may differ, but we have a mechanism in place to prevent Rams Saints, to prevent the kind of bad call that isn't currently rectified that can wreck the NFL. That's what they need to do. And, Peter, they got a hell of a lot more riding on it than you and I do. Again, this is something that we would benefit from if it becomes a huge story, but it would hurt the game, and I don't want the game to be hurt by something that's avoidable. This, to me, screams out it's avoidable.
Yeah. Hey, look, Mike, you're right. Reasonable minds can disagree on this, but and I do understand. And last year I complained a lot about some of the calls that were obvious that just weren't being made. And clearly there had been some sort of edict, even if it's only in, when the officials get their grades on Tuesday after games. There has been some sort of edict, to settle down on the calls, it's got to really be egregious for you to make this call. Okay. But honestly, as I look at the whole thing in retrospect right now, I kind of like the fact that it's a little bit like an NBA playoff game, a little bit like sort of let them play, because I think that the game goes faster, it's smoother, and you don't have as many ticky-tack calls.
And if you lower the standard, it's easier to get all the calls right, Peter. Another thing they need to do is increase the money for all officials. I've heard that time and again. When you've got a guy like a Dean Blandino who says on the record a few years ago, I was interviewing him for the PFTPM podcast, he said in a very tactful way, the league doesn't value that position the way it should of executive VP of officiating.
Right.
That's code for they don't pay enough. And when you have multiple referees who choose to retire to go work for TV instead because they're going to get more money and they're going to have less stress, they're not paying enough for these jobs. Those jobs become more important in a world of widespread legalized gambling, and the sooner they realize that, the sooner they're going to protect themselves against debacles as well.
One quick thing about officiating and about paying and everything like that. In my opinion, Dean Blandino should have been brought back into this league a year ago at whatever the number would have had to be, even if it's 1.5, 1.8 million, and everybody is like fainting back there. What? An officiating supervisor, a vice president of officiating, 1.8 million? Look, from Labor Day to the second week of February, every year in the NFL, who is the second most important person in the National Football League office? And that is the vice president of officiating. He's got to make the tough calls, and he's the one who has to be the ultimate adjudicator when there are close calls and coaches are calling screaming. Okay, why do you think Dean Blandino wanted out? I mean, it was heartache. Number one, it's heartache, and number two, it just totally controls your life. If you want to do that, if you want to have a really good person at this job, pay him. How many people in the NFL office right now are making $1 million? A lot. Okay. And so to me, not valuing the vice president of officiating and not paying the vice president of officiating, a premier salary, I think has been a huge black eye for the NFL over the years.
I agree with everything that you said, 100%, with one small caveat. I would suggest that from Labor Day until early February, the VP of officiating is the most important person in the league office, because every game has that person's potential fingerprints on it, where the commissioner, suspensions, those are significant, those are important, other big picture things. But game in and game out, week in and week out, it's that executive VP, senior VP, whatever title they want to give out. They give out a bigger title instead of giving out big money. They need to give out the big money, and the hell with the title. Who cares about the title? It's the W-2 that they care about, and it needs to have more money for that.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.